was just another Tuesday. Nothing special about it. I was exhausted, pulling into my driveway after a grueling 12-hour shift at the warehouse. My back ached, my hands were rough with calluses, and my boots felt like bricks as I dragged myself toward the front door. Mr. Reynolds, my elderly neighbor, was outside watering his flowers. He smiled and waved. "Ethan, haven't seen your folks around in a while. They must be having a blast on that fancy cruise." I froze. "Cruise?" His smile faded a little. "Oh yeah, the Caribbean one. Your sister posted pictures online. Looked like paradise." My fingers tightened around my keys. I barely mumbled a response before stepping inside, shutting the door a little too hard behind me. My mind was racing. My parents were on a cruise? 3 days ago, just 3 damn days ago, my mother had called me sobbing. Said Dad needed an expensive prescription. Said the electric bill was overdue. Said they weren't sure they'd make it through the month. I had sent them $900 instead of my usual $700, even though I could barely afford it. Even though I had skipped meals and put off replacing my work boots to make sure they were okay. And now they were sipping cocktails in the Bahamas. I collapsed onto the couch, my hand shaking as I pulled up my banking app. The automatic weekly transfers to my parents stared back at me. Every Friday, like clockwork. I had never hesitated, never questioned them. They were my parents, and I had done what any good son would do. But now I wasn't so sure. I opened Facebook. I didn't use it much, but my sister, Lila, loved posting every detail of her perfect life. And there it was, a full album titled Family Vacation. The first picture punched me in the gut. Mom, wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, standing next to Dad, who was grinning with a drink in his hand. Lila and her husband, Chris, beaming on the deck of a luxury cruise ship. My vision blurred as I scrolled. More pictures, more proof. Mom wearing a gold bracelet. Dad showing off a brand new watch. Lila boasting about how lucky our parents were to be treated to such an amazing trip. And then, the final blow. A comment under one of the photos. "Wow, Chris is so generous to take Mom and Dad on this vacation." Chris, my brother-in-law, the same man who had never once offered to help them financially, the same man who had looked down on me for years, and yet my parents had responded with heart emojis, thanking him, praising their wonderful children, plural, as if I had been involved, as if I had known, as if I hadn't been the one paying for it all. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through my banking records. The emergency transfer I had sent had gone through hours before they boarded the ship. It wasn't just this one time. There were patterns, regular withdrawals that matched up with weekend getaways, shopping sprees, expensive dinners. They had been lying to me for years. I pulled up my text messages, reading every desperate plea. "Ethan, sweetie, we hate to ask, but your father's medication is so expensive. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Son, we're struggling this month. Anything helps. We love you." Lies, all of it. Anna, my girlfriend, had tried to warn me. "It's always an emergency with them, Ethan," she had said when my mom called about the furnace breaking last winter. "And have you noticed how it's always right before a weekend or a holiday?" I had defended them. I had made excuses. But now, staring at their carefree smiles, I finally understood. They weren't struggling. They weren't barely scraping by. They were living it up. And they had been doing it on my dime. Rage coiled in my chest, burning away the last shreds of denial. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. And I was done being their fool. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. The betrayal sat in my chest like a stone, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pictures, Mom laughing on the cruise deck, Dad holding his overpriced drink, Lila glowing with satisfaction. 3 days ago, they had begged me for money. 3 days ago, I had given up my own comfort so they wouldn't freeze or go without medicine. And the whole time, they had been packing their bags. By the time morning came, the anger had settled into something colder, sharper. I wasn't just upset, I was done. For the first time in 3 years, I called in sick. My boss didn't even question it. I never missed work. But today, I had something more important to do. I drove to my parents' house with my jaw clenched so tight, it hurt. Every mile I put behind me only made me angrier. Memories flooded my mind, times they had called, voices full of panic, swearing they had no other options. "Ethan, we hate to ask, but we don't know what else to do." They had known exactly what they were doing. Their car was in the driveway. They were back from their little getaway, probably still basking in the glow of their vacation. I rang the doorbell. It took a minute, but eventually, Dad answered, still in his bathrobe. His face went from surprise to something else, something guarded. He knew. He knew I had found out. Mom appeared behind him, wearing that same nervous smile she always used when she wanted to manipulate me. "Ethan, what a surprise, sweetheart. We weren't expecting you." I ignored the fake warmth in her voice. "How was the Bahamas?" She flinched. Dad's jaw tightened. He had the nerve to look annoyed, like I was the problem here. "You weren't supposed to find out about that," he muttered. Not sorry, not even embarrassed, just irritated that their little scheme had been exposed. Something inside me snapped. "3 days ago, you called me crying for money," I said, voice deadly calm. "You said you couldn't afford Dad's medicine. You said you couldn't pay your heating bill." I took a step forward. "And then you went on a cruise." Mom's smile disappeared. She looked away. "It's not like that, honey." "It's exactly like that." I cut her off. I checked my bank records. "The $900 I sent you? You got it the same day you boarded the ship." Dad crossed his arms. "Laura and Chris paid for the cruise. We just needed some spending money." My stomach twisted. "My money," I said through clenched teeth. "You used my money." Dad scoffed. "You're overreacting." I actually laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. Overreacting? I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and right there, in front of them, I canceled every automatic payment. Every single one. Mom gasped. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Dad's face turned red. "You need to think about this. We're family." "No," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't use each other. Family doesn't pretend to be struggling while living off someone else's hard work. Mom tried a different tactic. Her voice softened, full of fake sadness. "Sweetheart, we needed that money." "For what?" I demanded. "For cocktails. For souvenirs. For the new bracelet you were wearing in the photos." She went silent. Dad's voice dropped into that condescending tone he always used when he wanted to put me in my place. "You wouldn't have fit in, Ethan. It was a luxury cruise. Laura and Chris's kind of thing. You would have been uncomfortable." There it was. The truth. They hadn't just lied to me. They had excluded me. Used my money to fund a trip they never even considered inviting me on. Because I wasn't like Lila. I wasn't rich. I wasn't successful in their eyes. I was just the one who worked my hands raw to support them. I stared at them. These people who had raised me. These people I had trusted. "Find another ATM," I said coldly. Then I turned and walked away. They followed me to my truck, voices rising, desperate now. "Ethan, please, son, don't do this. We need you." I slammed the driver's door shut, ignoring them. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. But as I drove away, their voices fading into the distance, something settled inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just their obedient, guilt-ridden son. I was free. I expected them to back off, to realize they had pushed me too far, to feel even a little bit of shame. I was wrong. By the time I got home, my phone was already blowing up. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages that bounced between apologies and guilt trips. "Mom, Ethan, please, we didn't mean to hurt you. You're our son. We love you. Dad, you're being unreasonable. We raised you. You wouldn't even have what you do now without us." And the worst one, "Lila, wow, drama much? It was just a trip. Maybe if you worked harder, you wouldn't be so bitter." That one almost made me drive back and lose my temper all over again. Anna found me sitting on the couch, my phone still buzzing, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. She didn't say "I told you so." Didn't remind me how many times she had warned me. Instead, she sat next to me, took the phone out of my hands, and silenced it. "Breathe," she said softly. "They don't get to have this power over you anymore." I exhaled shakily. She was right, but it still burned. I had spent years doing everything I could to support them, believing I was helping my family. And now that I had cut them off, they weren't reflecting. They weren't apologizing. They were angry that their money supply was gone. I should have seen it earlier. The way they only ever called when they needed something. The way they had forgotten my birthday, but never forgot to remind me when bills were due. The way they had treated me like I was less a workhorse, not a son, not family. Something cold and final settled inside me. I wasn't going back. I meant what I said when I told them to find another ATM. I blocked their numbers. That same night, Anna helped me log into my bank account and go through everything. She was methodical, patient. I realized just how much I had blindly given them over the years. Tens of thousands. Gone. Not on medical bills, not on food or necessities. On them living better than I did. I should have been furious. But after the initial sting, all I felt was relief. For the first time in years, my paycheck would be mine. For the first time, I wouldn't be working overtime just to keep them comfortable while I barely got by. Anna nudged my arm. "Let's do something for you this weekend." I stared at her. "Like what?" She shrugged. "Something you never let yourself do, because you were too busy taking care of them." It took me a second to even think of an answer. Eventually, I said, "A weekend trip, somewhere quiet." And just like that, we booked a small cabin in the mountains. A simple, peaceful getaway. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. I went to bed that night lighter than I had felt in years. I should have known it wasn't over. The next evening, the doorbell rang. Anna gave me a questioning look, and I already knew. My stomach sank. I opened the door. Lila stood there, arms crossed, looking perfect as always, flawless hair, designer purse, polished nails. And behind her, our parents. And behind them, Chris, my smug, arrogant brother-in-law, who looked about as thrilled to be here as I was to see him. Lila didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped forward like she owned the place. "We need to talk." I didn't move. We really don't. Dad sighed like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Ethan, enough of this. Let's be reasonable." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Reasonable? You lied to me. You used me. And the second I cut you off, you show up here to what? Make me feel bad?" Lila rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You're acting like you're some kind of victim." Mom sniffled, dabbing at non-existent tears. "We are victims. We raised you and now you're abandoning us. Is that what you want? To break up this family?" Anna appeared beside me, her presence solid and steady. "Funny," she said coolly, "because it looks to me like you broke it. The moment you decided Ethan was only good for his bank account." Lila's expression darkened. "Stay out of this. It's family business." Anna didn't flinch. "And I'm his family. You don't get to decide that." Chris finally spoke. "Can we just get this over with? The longer we stand here, the dumber I feel." I raised an eyebrow. "You could have just not come." Lila shot him a glare before turning back to me. "Here's the deal, Ethan. You cut Mom and Dad off without warning. That was cruel. They're struggling now." I crossed my arms. "Oh? Struggling how?" "They just got back from an expensive vacation." Lila's lips pressed together. Dad cleared his throat. "Things have changed." Chris sighed, rubbing his temples. "Laura, just tell him." Lila hesitated, then huffed. "Fine, I lost my job." I blinked. "Okay?" She scoffed. "Okay? That's all you have to say?" I shrugged. "I don't know, Lila. Maybe if you worked harder, you wouldn't be so bitter." Her face twisted with anger. "That's not funny. Chris and I have bills, expenses. Mom and Dad have nothing now that you've cut them off." And there it was. They weren't just here to guilt me. They were here because they needed money. I let out a slow breath, looked each of them in the eye, then said, "Not my problem." Lila gasped, like I had slapped her. Mom's fake tears turned real. Dad's face went hard. Chris smirked. The smug bastard actually looked amused. "That's what I said," he muttered under his breath. Lila spun to him. "Excuse me?" Chris leaned against the doorframe, looking bored. "I told you, Laura, I'm not covering for your parents, and I'm sure as hell not covering for you anymore." The blood drained from Lila's face. "You," Chris pulled something from his pocket, tossed it toward her. "Keys." "I changed the locks," he said simply. "Take your stuff and go," Mom wailed. Dad looked ready to explode. But Lila? For the first time in her life, she looked small. I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. I stepped back and shut the door in their faces. Anna turned to me, eyebrow raised. "Well, that was fun." I exhaled, shaking my head. "Let's finish packing. We've got a trip to take." And for the first time in years, I felt nothing but peace. The weekend trip was exactly what I needed. For the first time in years, I wasn't waking up to panicked texts or guilt-ridden voicemails. I wasn't spending my hard-earned paycheck on someone else's luxuries. And most importantly, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis to land on my shoulders. Anna and I spent 2 days in the mountains, away from everything. The air was crisp, the silence peaceful. We hiked, we talked, we sat by the fire without a single interruption. It felt good. It felt like freedom. But the moment we got back home, reality was waiting. The first sign was the pile of mail stuffed into my mailbox, most of it junk. But one envelope stood out. My parents' handwriting. I almost tossed it without opening it, but curiosity won. Inside was a letter, a long, desperate plea, written in Mom's neat, careful script. "Ethan, we know you're angry, but please, don't let this be the end of our family. We made mistakes, but we're struggling now more than ever. Laura is going through a hard time, and we all need to come together. Your father and I are losing the house. We don't know where we'll go. We raised you with love, and we never imagined you'd turn your back on us in our time of need. Please come talk to us. Let's fix this before it's too late." I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. They had never apologized, never admitted what they did was wrong. Just more guilt, more manipulation, more "you owe us because we raised you." Anna peered over my shoulder. "Let me guess," she muttered. "They want money." I held the letter up. "Losing the house. Apparently I'm supposed to drop everything and save them." She sighed. "What are you going to do?" I folded the letter, tossed it on the coffee table, and sat down. "Nothing." Her lips curled into a small, approving smile. I meant it. I was done. But my parents weren't. The next morning, I got to work early, ready to focus on something other than family drama. The warehouse was loud with forklifts, humming, and metal crates shifting. It was a relief, a place where everything made sense, where effort was rewarded, where no one expected me to solve their problems. Then my supervisor waved me over. "There's a woman outside asking for you," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Says it's urgent." My stomach sank. I already knew. I stepped outside and, sure enough, there was Mom, standing in the parking lot, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked smaller than usual, like she had shrunk under the weight of her own lies. She spotted me and immediately teared up. "Oh, Ethan." "No," I cut her off. "Not here." She flinched at my tone but nodded. We walked a few steps away, just far enough that my coworkers wouldn't hear. Then she launched into her performance. "Ethan, please. We're desperate. Your father and I. We don't have anywhere to turn." "Sell the house," I said flatly. She gasped like I had slapped her. "You don't understand. That house has been in our family for years." "You mean the house you told me you couldn't afford years ago? The one you kept saying needed repairs while you went on vacations?" She swallowed hard, trying a different approach. "Laura has nowhere to go." I actually laughed. "She's a grown woman. She can figure it out." Tears welled in her eyes. "We never meant to hurt you, Ethan. You have to believe that." "Then why did you lie?" She hesitated. And there it was. She couldn't say it, couldn't take responsibility, couldn't admit that she and Dad had never seen me as an equal to Lila. She sniffled, shaking her head. "I don't know how you became so heartless. That should have stung." It didn't. I just stared at her. I learned from the best. Her lip trembled. "If you walk away from this family, you'll regret it." "I walked away months ago," I said simply, "and I've never been happier." She opened her mouth, maybe to throw one last desperate guilt trip, but I turned and walked away before she could say another word. She didn't follow. She knew it was over. That night, Dad tried calling from a new number. I blocked it. Lila sent a text so full of rage, I could practically feel the venom dripping off the screen. "You are dead to this family." I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Anna sat next to me, watching my face carefully. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. No sadness, no regret, just peace. I looked at her and smiled, like I finally have my life back. Blocking their numbers should have been the end of it. But people like my parents and Lila don't just let go. They don't reflect. They don't apologize. They push. They test every boundary, try every trick, do whatever it takes to get what they want. So I wasn't surprised when my parents started reaching out in other ways. First, it was mutual friends, people the first barely spoke to calling out of the blue, suddenly concerned about family unity. "Hey man, your mom said you're going through something. Maybe you should talk to her." Then it was distant relatives, aunts, uncles, even cousins I hadn't seen in years. "Ethan, they're your parents. You only get one family." I shut it down every time. But then, they did something I didn't expect. They showed up at my workplace, It was mid-morning when one of the warehouse guys, Travis, found me. "Dude, you've got some people out front asking for you." My stomach sank. "Who?" He shrugged. "Older couple. Woman was crying. Said it's urgent." I knew before I even stepped outside. And there they were. Mom was in full distressed mother mode, hands clasped, eyes red and watery, like she'd been crying for hours. Dad stood beside her, arms crossed, playing the role of the stern but reasonable father. I took a slow breath. "You can't be here." Mom rushed forward. "Ethan, please, just talk to us." "No." Her lip trembled. "This isn't you. You're not cruel." I laughed. "You don't know me at all, do you?" Dad finally spoke. "Son, enough. We need to move past this." "You mean I need to forget everything you did so you can go back to using me?" His jaw tightened. "This attitude isn't going to get you anywhere in life. You think you're winning by cutting us off?" I exhaled sharply. "Winning? No. But I am finally living my own life." Mom wiped at non-existent tears. "We raised you, Ethan. We sacrificed for you. You raised me? That's rich." I folded my arms. "You fed me and put a roof over my head because that's what parents do. That's the bare minimum." She flinched. I turned to Dad. "Did you sacrifice for me? Or did you waste every dollar you had while expecting me to clean up the mess?" His eyes darkened. "We're losing everything." I tilted my head. "Sounds like a you problem. You don't mean that." "I do." The truth was, I had meant it for a long time. I just hadn't let myself believe it. I let out a breath, shaking my head. "This is the last time we'll have this conversation. I'm done." Dad scoffed. "That's not how family works." I met his gaze. Then maybe we were never a real family to begin with. Mom gasped like I had stabbed her. "Ethan, you don't mean that." But I did, and I walked away without another word. After that, they went silent. For weeks, no calls, no texts, no unwanted visitors. It was over, or so I thought. I was sitting at home with Anna one night, half watching a movie, when my phone lit up. A new number. Normally I would have ignored it, but something in my gut told me to pick up. I answered. There was silence at first, then a slow, bitter voice. "Lila, you happy now?" She spat. I leaned back on the couch. "Depends. What am I supposed to be happy about?" She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Mom and Dad lost the house." I didn't say anything. "You ruined them," she accused. "They had nothing after you cut them off. They couldn't pay their debts. They had to sell everything. And now they're in some tiny apartment." I waited for the guilt to come. It didn't. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't my fault. They had made their choices. I hadn't made them lie. I hadn't forced them to waste money they didn't have. I had just stopped fixing their mistakes. "I'm supposed to care?" I finally asked. Lila growled into the phone. "You're a selfish, ungrateful piece of..." I hung up, blocked the number. Then I turned to Anna. "That was satisfying." She grinned. "Good. You deserve a little satisfaction after all the crap they put you through." I wrapped an arm around her, exhaling deeply. And for the first time in my life, I really, truly believed that she was right. Weeks passed, then months. At first, there was an adjustment period. Years of conditioning had left their mark, and sometimes, out of pure habit, I'd reach for my phone, half expecting a message from my parents or Lila, some new crisis they needed me to fix. But every time I remembered, there were no more guilt trips waiting for me, no more desperate pleas disguised as love, just silence. And I liked it. With my money finally mine, I started making real changes in my life. I replaced my old, beaten-down truck. Nothing flashy, just something reliable. For the first time in forever, I didn't have to put off repairs or stress over unexpected expenses. I finally bought the work boots I had needed for months. I opened a retirement account, something I had never been able to do while hemorrhaging money to my parents. And best of all, Anna and I started planning a future together, a real one. We weren't living paycheck to paycheck anymore. We could travel, save, dream things I had never let myself do before. She caught me one night, standing by the window, staring out into the quiet street, lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" she asked, stepping closer. I turned to her, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Just thinking about how much lighter everything feels. She smiled. "Amazing what happens when you stop carrying other people's burdens." I pulled her into my arms, breathing her in. For once, the future wasn't something to fear. It was mine to create. I heard through the grapevine that my parents were still struggling. Apparently, after losing the house, they had tried living with Lila, but that hadn't lasted long. She had never been responsible a day in her life, and without Chris's money propping her up, reality hit hard. Eventually, she moved back home to their tiny apartment. The perfect family, stuck together in misery. And the funniest part, Lila hated it. For years, she had been their favorite, the golden child. But now that they had nothing, she was starting to see the cracks. The way they guilt-tripped, the way they manipulated. She called me once, not to apologize, not to admit she had been wrong, but to complain. Do you have any idea what it's like dealing with them all the time? She had whined. They expect me to do everything for them. They treat me like a damn servant. I had laughed. Really, genuinely laughed. Sounds rough, I had said. Then I hung up. I didn't block her number. She could sit with her choices the way I had been forced to sit with mine for years. Anna and I got engaged 6 months later. It was small, simple, just the two of us in a quiet ceremony with close friends. No stress, no drama. My parents didn't get an invitation. Neither did Lila. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. Because family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and choice. And I had finally chosen myself. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And I had never been happier. Story 2, I take suppose you don't mind sitting with the children. Casually, my mother remarked. After Christmas supper, I left. They eventually got to see me a year later. When I eventually realized my family would never see me, I was 28 years old. Not at all. Not me, really. The idea was for Christmas dinner to be just like any other family meal. Not comfy, but doable. I'd mastered the art of grinning through the subtle jabs about my housing, my oddball job choices, and the fact that I was unmarried. It was comfortable. For an adult lady, the translation is too little. I readied myself for everything. Being invited to sit at the children's table was something I hadn't anticipated. As she arranged crystal glasses on the dining room table, Mom mentioned it in a casual manner. Under the light, the fine china shone. Put cards with my sister-in-law's flawless handwriting on them. Not one with my name. You don't mind sitting with the little ones, do you, Alice, my dear? Logan's new in-laws are joining us at the adult table, so there isn't much room. Halfway through setting out the silverware she had instructed me to place around us, my hands froze. The house was a hive of activity. In the kitchen, my brother Logan and his spouse Helen were giggling over wine. In the living room, my other brother David was displaying his newborn's photos to our aunts and uncles. Is it okay if I sit at the children's table? Confident that I had misheard, I repeated. I'm 28. Mom made a practiced, precise adjustment to a napkin without even looking up. Sweetheart, it's only for supper. In addition, someone must watch over the younger ones. All of a sudden, the wooden chair next to me seemed necessary for support. I whitened my knuckles as I held onto its back. I could see proof of my invisible city everywhere. Where I stood at the border of the family photos, cropping out is simple. Like a boulder in a flood, the group discussion swept past me. In this sense, working as a graphic designer was a fun pastime. My brothers, however, had legitimate jobs. I wasn't a kid. I had clients who appreciated my work, a downtown apartment, and a prosperous freelancing career. I was 13 all the time, though, here in this house. No, it was a solid yet little word. When Mom did glance up, her expression changed from one of preoccupation to one of perplexity. Dear, what is that? No, I said. My voice became louder. I'm not at the children's table. I was too familiar with the dismissive sound of Mom's chuckle. Avoid being theatrical. It's not really important. However, it was. It was the culmination of years of being disregarded, underappreciated, and ignored. It was the ideal representation of how they perceived me. Not nearly grown up, not deserving of the automatic respect accorded to my siblings. Something inside of me broke at that very moment, not violently, but with the silent finality of a thread that has been tugged too far. I put down the cutlery I had been holding. Not a word. I went to get my coat from the closet and made my way to the door. Where are you going, Alice? In 20 minutes, everyone will be seated to dine. I didn't respond. As I went outdoors, the cool December air struck my face, waking me from what felt like a lengthy nap. My mother's voice rose behind me. more incredulous than irritated. I turned the key, got into my car, and left the house where I had grown up, having an oddly peaceful feeling. Within minutes, my phone began to buzz. My mother, father, and brothers all texted me, not inquiring about my well-being, asking when I will return, making me aware of my obligations. At a red light, questioning my maturity. I typed a message I had been putting off for years. When I entered the family group chat, I will no longer be treated like a child. We can discuss when you're prepared to treat me like an adult. Enjoy your supper till then. Reactions were prompt: startle, dismissal, charges of being conceited and theatrical, craving attention. Later, my father's harsh will talk about this conduct. Young woman, my sister-in-law, even having family to spend Christmas with would be appreciated by some. On Christmas Day, I switched off my alerts and drove to a little cafe that was open. After placing my coffee order, I sat by the window and watched the snow start to fall in exquisite swirls. I was able to breathe for the first time in years. Blessed silence greeted me at my apartment. No inquisitive inquiries concerning my romantic history, no analogies to cousins who had achieved greater success, and no reminders that my biological clock was running out. After kicking off my heels and hanging up the green dress I had picked out with care to win over my family, I changed into sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. My living room had a tiny but ideal Christmas tree in the corner, adorned with ornaments I had selected, not the flawless color coordination my mother demanded. After an hour of silence, my phone rang and my mother called. I waited for 4 rings before responding. "You've ruined Christmas dinner, and I'm not sure what kind of a prank you're playing. We had to reorganize the entire seating arrangement because your aunts are inquiring about your whereabouts. No. Are you all right?" No explanation for why I might have departed. "Just worried about inconvenience and looks. I'm not returning," I remarked, astonished at how composed my voice sounded. "Avoid being absurd. You're returning, of course. Get over whatever is causing this outburst and act like a grown-up. Big girl pants." I didn't miss the irony. "Mom, I'm a 28-year-old woman who has my own business. You requested me to sit at the children's table when everyone my age was seated at the adults' table. It has to do with space. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" "Alice, because today isn't the only day. Almost every day. It has to do with how you present David and Logan as my sons, the doctor, the engineer, and myself as Alice, my daughter. The way you inquire about their work but never mine is the problem. It has to do with the way you interrupt me in the middle of sentences to take their calls." It was the first time the other end was silent. This was a new approach for me to talk to my mother. In order to get along, I had been the nice daughter and the peacekeeper. "Do you truly feel that way?" She sounded smaller and her voice had lost its sharpness. "Indeed, for many years. One more moment of quiet. We didn't intend to give you that impression." It was more recognition than I had ever had, but it wasn't an apology. "You did, but I know. Furthermore, I can no longer act as though it doesn't hurt." I felt both empty and also fuller than before as I sat on my couch and gazed at my Christmas tree's lights. After we hung up, the weeks that followed were unfamiliar and unsettling. At first, my mother phoned every day, having uncomfortable discussions that ducked into more serious topics. The closest my father could come to an apology was a rough text message. "Never intended to diminish your significance. I'm also proud of you." The responses from my brother were predictable. Logan, at all times, the pride of our parents, was contemptuous and defensive. One evening after his infant had gone to sleep, David gave me a call. "I never realized," he muttered, "but I can see it in retrospect. I apologize for not noticing earlier. I didn't realize I needed that salve until I heard those words." My parents invited me to dinner in January, but it wasn't a family get-together. Only me. I cautiously accepted, braced for either real transformation or disappointment. When I got there, Mom, who appeared to be older than she had been at Christmas, opened the door. She gave me a genuine embrace instead of the brief, insincere one I was accustomed to. She told me about her own childhood as the only daughter among 4 sons, how she had fought for recognition, and how she had somehow internalized the idea that women needed to marry well, to matter. "I've been doing some thinking," she said as we sat in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken words and some remembering. She said, "I think I've been harder on you because I see myself in you. Self-reliant, unyielding, and a little grin. Gifted." It wasn't a flawless dialogue. Old tendencies surfaced, were identified, and were adjusted. However, it was a beginning. I noticed something that caused my throat to constrict when dinner was served. My grandmother's china was used by my mother to set the table. Usually, the set is saved for the most significant visitors. My parents tried to express interest in my work, sometimes in an embarrassing but earnest way. As a little token of appreciation for my expertise, Mom requested me to assist rewrite the newsletter for her garden club. Not everything changed in a single day. During a March family birthday party, my aunt inquired about my plans to find a decent man and begin a genuine life. My mother shocked me before I could react. Alice has a successful real-life Helen. Everybody's journey is different. My aunt's expression of amazement reflected how I felt on the inside. The biggest shifts occurred inside of me. I started to see how I had contributed to my own devaluation and how I had reduced myself to meet their standards. I started charging my clients what I was worth instead of what I assumed they would pay without protest. Instead of letting discussions pass me by at family get-togethers, I spoke up. A few days were more difficult than others. People-pleasing behaviors didn't go away overnight, but I had gone too far at that Christmas meal, and there was no turning back. I eagerly accepted the invitation to the Christmas dinner. When I got there this time, my sister-in-law's flawless calligraphy was used to write my name on a place card at the main table. Mom saw that I was staring at it and gave me a little pat on the arm. "We reserved a seat for you," she said. "From now on, we shall always do." It was a start, but it wasn't everything. As I sat down at the table, I became aware that the most significant acknowledgement had come from myself. At last, I recognized my value, my voice, and my entitlement to occupy space. Uncle Rob inquired about my previous business during supper. Such inquiries were brief and swiftly gave way to a discussion of someone else's more significant accomplishments. This time, my father really put down his fork and asked follow-up questions when I announced that I had landed a contract with a large retail chain for their rebranding. With a glimmer of reverence in his eyes, he remarked, "That's a big deal. How did you capture their interest?" It was a surprise question. In order to avoid boring them or taking up too much family time, I prepared my typical condensed responses. Rather, I ended up describing my marketing plan. The presentation and portfolio I created had impressed them. My mom truly listened as she leaned forward. "Without a team, you accomplished all of it on your own." With a strange mixture of pride and lingering grief that this was surprise to her, I nodded. "That's impressive, Alice," she replied, her tone earnest, but unrealistic. I could not quite interpret Logan's expression as he studied me across the table. Later, he cornered me in the kitchen when I was clearing the table. "The entire freelance thing is something you're actually making work." His tone was one of sincere interest with a hint of something more, not disdain. I didn't see it right away. Uncertainty. I acknowledged that it's not simple. Plates are being stacked near the sink, yes, but I'm doing more than just working. In fact, I'm doing really well. Slowly, he nodded. "You know, sometimes I imagine what it would be like to create something that is exclusively yours without having to report to anyone." I was taken aback by the confession. Logan had always shown confidence in his chosen course and appeared happy with the stability and status that came with being an engineer. I said, "You could always try it. You may always adjust your course at any time." He chuckled briefly as he looked over his shoulder to the living room, where our parents were hosting visitors. "Yes. Is it possible that the golden boy would quit his actual job? Dad would suffer a heart attack." The remark that lingered between us revealed more than he could have meant. Not for the first time, I pondered whether my brothers had also been burdened by the family's expectations, albeit in different ways. As the visitors started to depart later that evening, my mother drew me away. Her demeanor had a hesitant tone that I didn't often identify with her. She started by smoothing an undetectable wrinkle off her shirt and remarked, "I've been thinking about what you said last year about how we introduced you versus your brothers." I paused, allowing her to finish. "Helen inquired about each of you during last week's garden club meeting, and I realized I was repeating myself by discussing the boys' titles first." I stopped myself as she glanced up at me. I informed them that my daughter Alice had recently signed a deal with Brighton Retail. "Do you recognize that large chain? She is in charge of their complete rebranding as its creative director." My throat constricted. What a little creature. However, it was everything but little. I just said, "Thank you." With hesitation, she extended her hand and gripped mine. "Alice, I'm trying. I'm trying, but I don't always get it right. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Claire, David's wife. Without introducing herself, she stated, "I need your professional opinion. Since Emma will be moving into a big girl bed, we are redesigning the nursery, and I'm at a loss for ideas." I almost dropped my phone. Claire had never once recognized my professional skills in the years I'd known her. Expensive designer artifacts, meticulously chosen to frighten and wow, were on display in her house. "Do you need my assistance with Emma's room?" Confident that I had misunderstood, I repeated. She responded, "If you have time." Her speech took on a new tone of respect. "You illustrated a series of children's books for the hospital wing," David said. "Alice, they were stunning. I didn't know you were capable of such work." The initiative turned into a link between us. Weekends spent at their home, drafting ideas as Emma walked around us. Coffee with Claire that evolved from courteous small chat into real talks, discovering that behind her flawless facade was a person with her own fears and challenges of conformity. My family held great importance. One afternoon, when we were painting clouds on Emma's ceiling, she said, "When David and I first started dating, I was afraid of your parents." David's former partner, who went on to become a pediatric surgeon, was frequently brought up by your mother. I had the impression that I was being evaluated against an impossibly high standard. Claire intimidated me as I glanced at her in amazement. She had always appeared to fit in with my family's ideals so naturally. We all had the ideal house, the ideal wedding, and the ideal profession before having kids. After a time, I responded, "Measured against impossible standards." She nodded, giving a cloud another whirl of white. "For Emma, it's different. After Christmas last year, David and I discussed the trends. We wish to avoid doing it again." The nursery became a symbol of what may be achieved with fresh insight, an imaginative and colorful space that transcends gender, classic pinks that provide for more than simply aesthetic appeal. With Emma in his arms, David stood in the doorway when it was all over, his face soft with more than a simple admiration for the aesthetics. He said, "This is what I want for her. Must learn early on that her worth does not lie in being someone else's ideal of her." I reflected on the lengthy journey that had brought us to this point and how a single act of defiance had set off a chain reaction that kept becoming bigger. An unforeseen catastrophe arose in the summer. Dad was playing golf when he suffered a mild heart attack. The doctor's opinion, not our own feelings, was minor. With tension causing old habits to resurface, the family gathered in the hospital. Mom was alternating between yelling commands and periods of frightened quiet, hardly able to control herself. Logan took over right away, consulting with physicians and deciding on treatment. I saw that I was reverting to my old job as the quiet support person who was there to make calls and buy coffee, but not to occupy space or voice ideas. However, I noticed that I was slipping into that pattern as the hours passed in the cardiology waiting room and decided to take the initiative. When the cardiologist arrived to go about treatment choices, I accompanied Logan in asking straightforward, knowledgeable questions when recovery care decisions needed to be made. I made specific recommendations when I firmly diverted a conversation about Dad's aftercare that was taking place around her. Instead of with her, Mom gave me a startled look. I informed her that you are most immediately impacted by this. What do you believe would be most effective? When did you become so capable? She murmured softly as we sat together in the hospital cafeteria later. I knew the inquiry wasn't meant as an insult, but it still may have hurt. Mom, I've always been able. I simply quit keeping it a secret. As she thought about this, she slowly rotated her coffee cup. Today, I felt really afraid. I still am. However, it was helpful to see you and Logan collaborate to manage things. I responded, that's what family does, actual family. We encourage one another and present ourselves fully without assigning positions or keeping score. Dad's recuperation presented yet another chance to change the dynamics of our family. To assist at my parents' place, I took 2 weeks off from work, not out of duty, but by choice. Without the previous hierarchy that had pitted my obedience against her authority, my mother and I were able to establish a new rhythm of sharing tasks. One evening, I sat on the porch swing and watched fireflies emerge in the summer twilight as my mom took a rare bath and my dad dozed in his chair. With 2 cups of iced tea, Logan came over to me. Do you recall the days when we caught them in jars? He handed me a drink and asked, And because it was terrible to retain them, Mom would force us to let them go, I added, grinning at the recollection. For a time, we swung in cozy stillness while the shackles creaked, an old-timey soundtrack. He eventually mentioned altering course, and I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas. I looked at him and waited. On the side, I'm leveraging my technical experience to launch a consulting firm on my own terms. He seemed nearly ashamed. For months, I had been preparing it, but I wasn't sure how to tell anybody. Why not? His shrug was not a nonchalant one. I suppose they're afraid of falling short of expectations. At that moment, I realized that each of my brothers had carried a different burden. I had experienced the same path, although with distinct expressions. The anxiety of falling short of our family's expectations. The anxiety of losing acceptance. In any case, I responded, I believe it's fantastic, and I can help you with branding if you need it. He had a sincere smile. I'm relieved. That's what I hoped you would say. My connection with my family had changed into something I wouldn't have recognized a year ago, by the time the leaves started to change once more. Not flawless. Though essentially changed, there were still times when I felt frustrated and reverted to my old habits. Some of Dad's sharper edges have been tempered by his health concern. He genuinely asked me for assistance on updating the family insurance company's web presence during a family meal. I was shown the Brighton Shop website you developed by your mother. Gruffly, he said, "What do you name it?" It has user experience. Our website requires that. It was more than just his recognition of my abilities. It was an acknowledgement of my expertise. He appreciated that I could help in ways that he found meaningful. The initiative turned into an unanticipated platform for interaction. As we worked together, I recognized him not just as my father, but also as a guy who had created something out of nothing and who was as proud of his work as I was of mine. He viewed me as a professional with perspectives he hadn't thought about, in addition to being his daughter. He observed, "You remind me of my father sometimes." He had that same creative streak, and he could look at problems sideways and see solutions. One day while we were going over the prototype I had made, no one else did. He compared me to the grandfather I had loved, which was probably the finest compliment he could offer. The father whose spirit of entrepreneurship had laid the groundwork for our family. I considered the approaching holiday and the invitation to my parents' place for Christmas dinner that was sitting on my counter. There would still be difficult times, potential recurrences of past hurts, and partially broken habits. However, now that we could see each other better, we were all making an effort to put authenticity ahead of performance. My mother texted me to confirm that you would be arriving tomorrow. Your place card is prepared. Even though the message was so straightforward, it held the weight of acknowledgement. I'll be there, I texted back. Additionally, it's simpler for people to notice you if you have a clear understanding of who you are. Story 3. That transfer is what we're awaiting. My mother left a voicemail. I said, no more transfer. I got 38 text messages and 23 missed calls the following day. It was a Tuesday when the email arrived. That day wasn't very noteworthy. Otherwise, it's just another morning filled with client calls, spreadsheets, and excessive coffee consumption. During lunch, I nearly forgot to check my personal account. OMG. Did you see this from my cousin Melissa? It's almost the subject line. The office Wi-Fi takes ages to load the movie attachment. It was 43 seconds. That made all the difference. Last year, it was the traditional Christmas get-together for my family, the one I missed due to an urgent work-related matter. The urgency was that I had to complete a project that would guarantee my promotion, which had been providing them with financial support for the last 3 years. My mother's living room, the tree, the well-known decorations, and off-camera laughter were all featured in the opening moments of the film. Then I heard my brother Edward's voice, obviously intoxicated. I'm glad Rebecca was unable to attend. We can now genuinely have fun. I felt sick to my stomach. On my desk, my meal was neglected. Now she's so stiff. Carol, my sister, added her voice, behaving as though her fancy career makes her superior to the rest of us. The voice of my mother, who used to sing me to sleep, then comes on. Her expensive job is paying for this Christmas meal, so I can tolerate her rudeness. They chuckled, each and every one. My cousin, who had submitted the video, was probably holding the camera when it panned. They were there. My whole family is nodding in accord while sipping their beverages. The amusing part is that, Edward went on, She genuinely believes that we are interested in her work, as if any of us are interested in marketing tactics or anything else she does. More giggling. My father raised his glass to Rebecca, our personal ATM, and continued, "But we care about her paychecks." They publicly acknowledged my generosity and the reality that, to them, I was essentially just a bank account. The video terminated suddenly. Melissa read her message. "I'm so sorry, OMG. In order to demonstrate my therapist what I've been going through in this household, I intended to email her this. Give me a call, please. I couldn't talk, so I didn't call. I shook my hands, shutting my laptop. After Dad lost his work, they had to support them for 3 years. Carol sent money for school supplies for her children for 3 years. 3 years of paying Edward's rent while his unemployment. For 3 years, we thought of ourselves as a family that remained united during difficult times. Before I puked, I managed to go to the restroom. The remainder of the workday flew by. I grinned at my coworkers. I completed my presentation. During meetings, I nodded when necessary, but on the inside, I was continuously playing back those 43 seconds. Our own ATM. It was a risky journey home. My vision started getting blurry from tears. Twice I had to stop to catch my breath. By the time I arrived at my flat, an odd silence had descended upon me. The kind that follows a hurricane in which everything has been devastated. Nothing remains to lose. I looked at my phone. Melissa missed 5 calls. My mom gave me 2. Most likely, they ask for money every month. After all, it was the first of the month. I hung up the phone without answering any calls. Rather, I accessed my banking app and examined my past transactions. The routine remittances to my relatives seemed to go as planned. Mom and Dad get $1,200 a month to help with their mortgage. Edward receives $800 per month in short-term rent assistance. It's been 2 years. Carol spends $500 a month on the children's necessities, in addition to any last-minute requests for things like school excursions, auto repairs, and medical expenditures. I had given them more than $95,000 in the last 3 years. I could have used that money to pursue my own goals. The vacation I hadn't taken in 4 years, the master's degree I had put on hold, and the house I wanted to buy. To keep up with my family's lifestyle, I had been eating ramen twice a week in a 1-bedroom apartment. My phone rang once more. I didn't respond for the first time in my adult life, Mom. Rather, I poured a glass of wine for myself and decided there was no ATM. Clarity and 7 fresh voicemails arrived in the morning. "Mom here, Rebecca. Just checking in with the transfer for this month. It still hasn't arrived. Hello, sister. My landlord and Edward got into a bit of a fight. This month, an additional $300 would be helpful. Give me a call back. Rebecca." Again, Mom. "Is everything all right? That transfer is what we're awaiting. It's time to replenish Dad's blood pressure prescription." The tightness in my chest becomes tighter with every message. All of them validated what I had seen in the video. Nobody inquired about my well-being. I prepared for work in a methodical manner, like a robot carrying out its pre-programmed tasks. It showers, makes coffee, etc. I didn't weep again, though. Overnight, something had solidified inside of me. I canceled all recurring transfers to my family members by email while I was eating lunch. Like putting down a bulky rucksack I had been carrying for years, the relief came instantly. I then sent my mom a text. "This month, there will be no transfers. I have some personal financial concerns to attend to." She responded immediately. "What, Rebecca? Your dad needs his prescription filled. This isn't amusing." I ended my workday and shut off my phone. The calls got more serious that evening. Carol's, Edward, and my father all joined in. I got 38 text messages and 23 missed calls by 9 p.m. Despite reading them all, I didn't reply to any of them. "What made you so self-centered? We are related. Without his medicine, Dad may suffer a stroke. Eviction is a threat from my landlord." The guilt felt oppressive. I nearly gave in. I was on the verge of sending the money via my banking app. I had been well-conditioned for 3 years. Then I recalled our private ATM, the toast, the laughs, and the video. I slept better than I have in years after turning off my phone once more. A week went by. I made a new email address, updated my phone number, and temporarily stopped using social media. I needed time to reflect and reevaluate how I see love, family, and my own value. My flat was buzzed the next Saturday. Edward was standing there looking unkempt. As I looked through the crowd, my heart pounded. Despite my sweaty palms, I opened the door. "Rebecca, what the devil?" He pushed inside the flat, past me. "Your phone number has changed. Mom's anxiety is driving her crazy." I didn't think I needed any room. "Room?" He appeared disbelieving. "You need distance, but you can't suddenly shut off your family. Yesterday, I received an eviction notice from my landlord. Don't worry about me. Don't ask me why I could require space. Only the notice of eviction, the financial issue." I said, "I'm sorry to hear that. I was too. I didn't want my brother to be homeless in spite of everything. Apologies. Rebecca, you don't pay my rent." He was frustrated and raked his hands through his hair. "Whatever's going on with you, look, could you just send the money and take care of whatever it is you're dealing with?" I realized then that I was definitely not his sister. I was an inconvenient, emotional ATM. I am unable to accomplish it. Edward refuses or is unable to. His expression clouded. "Because you're simply being self-centered, in my opinion. I couldn't help but chuckle after everything this family has done for you. Empty. What specifically have I benefited from this family? You were raised by Edward. Encourage you. Been there for you." He enumerated these as though they were exceptional deeds of kindness, rather than the standard for what a family ought to be. "And over the last 3 years, I've given you all about $100,000 in exchange." I spoke steadily. I worked 60-hour weeks to earn the money that wasn't lent to me. He was kind enough to appear uneasy, but only for a moment. "We required it. You didn't. Edward, you have no idea what I need. You never inquired." He sneered. "How do you feel? We don't quarrel over your nice job, which hurts. Adult up, Rebecca." I then explained the video to him. As I explained exactly what I had observed, I saw a shift in his expression. What I had heard, he attempted to retreat. "We were only making jokes. Family is like that. Following a few drinks?" I said, "No, I don't know," as it seemed that my conception of family was entirely incorrect. I requested that he go. He did, which surprised me, but not before warning me that I was making a grave error and that I would regret abandoning my family. Perhaps he was correct, but as I shut the door after him, I had an unexpected sensation. Relief. As if I could breathe at last. My mother sent me an email the next day. "We must discuss the topic line." It was a short message. "Rebecca, you're misinterpreting what you believe to be true. Your family is us. You are loved by us. Give me a call so we can resolve this." No reference to the video. Don't apologize. Only emotional manipulation and gaslighting. I didn't answer. An even more urgent email came 3 days later. To pay for his prescription drugs, your father had to borrow money from his brother. Did you wish for that? To make us feel inferior? To force your dad to plead? I was stabbed by guilt. My goal was to cease allowing them to hurt me, not to harm them. I wrote one line back. "Dad has Social Security and a pension. With Medicare, his prescription drugs cost $43 a month." I was aware of this, as I had done some study on it before I began assisting them with their money. Even though their income was modest, it was sufficient to meet their needs without my assistance. What they lacked was sufficient to sustain the kind of life they had been used to, the way of life that my money had been supporting. In response to that email, my mother did not reply. A month went by. My family's quiet was both soothing and agonizing. I missed them, or more accurately, I missed the person I believed them to be. I missed having folks who were familiar with my background and who were descended from me. The anxiousness that accompanied every phone call, text message, and family get-together where I felt more like a resource than a sister or daughter, however, was something I didn't miss. I accomplished something groundbreaking in that month. I began to invest in myself financially. I reserved a beach vacation for the weekend. I enrolled in a photography course that I had been considering for years. I stopped daydreaming and started looking at real estate listings for my own house. I also began going to therapy, because it's difficult to break free from those who have persuaded you that their demands are more important than yours. Carol appeared at my workplace 6 weeks following Edward's visit. I saw her seated on a bench close to the entrance with her 2 children by her side as I was leaving work. My heart fell. Even for the kids, using them was a low blow. Rebecca, aunt. Lily, 8, ran with her arms extended toward me. Sincerely delighted to see her, I gave her a strong hug. In all of this, the children were innocent. Ben, who was 5 years old, trailed behind and encircled my legs. You were missed. You were lost, according to Mommy. However, we located you. I glanced over their heads at Carol. Her face was a well-honed blend of relief and worry. She stepped over to give me a hug and added, "We've been so worried." I allowed her, but I didn't move in her arms. On us, you vanished. I informed my mother why I was no longer sending money, updated my phone number, and made the necessary corrections. She looked at the children and cringed at the obvious reference to money. "Can we go chat somewhere? Maybe grab ice cream?" She directed this final bit to the youngsters, who instantly began bouncing with enthusiasm. I nodded, since I didn't want to disappoint the kids or have this discussion in front of my coworkers. We strolled to a neighboring ice cream parlor, the youngsters babbling about school and friends, oblivious to the tension between their mother and myself. After they were comfortable with their cones at an outside table where we could see them through the window, Carol got down to business. "Look, I don't know what occurred between you and Mom and Edward, but I watched the tape, Carol." I kept my voice down from last Christmas. Her face dropped. She recovered fast. "Oh, that. All of us were only making jokes. Rebecca, family is the same phrase that Edward had used, you know, as if they had practiced it. I'm joking that I'm your ATM, about putting up with me, just because I get paid." She was graceful enough to appear embarrassed. We had consumed alcohol. It was foolish. Indeed. Yes, it was. It was honest, but I was no longer interested in eating my melting ice cream, so I swirled it. "It's the most sincere you've been with me in a long time." "That's unfair," she objected. "You are loved by us." "Perhaps you do," I admitted. "However, you show me no regard or concern for my welfare. All that matters to you is what I can provide." She began to protest, but I interrupted her. "Carol, when was the last time you inquired about my life? About my aspirations, my challenges? Have you ever questioned why your children attend private gymnastics sessions while I live in a little apartment?" Her quiet was sufficient response. "If you'd really needed it, I would have helped," I added. "That's the role of family. However, you exploited it. You, everyone. And you didn't even have the grace to act as though you liked me." Her eyes welled with tears. Before she spoke, I had a fleeting suspicion that they could be sincere. "Without your assistance, Rebecca, I'm not sure how we'll survive. Insurance does not cover Ben's treatment sessions. Lily will soon require braces. Never about our connection, always about the money." I let out a groan, suddenly worn out. "Carol, you'll figure it out. In the same manner as other families, establishing a budget, making decisions, and taking on additional work as needed. With your large salary, you can say that with ease. My pay, which I obtained by working on the weekends and on holidays, going to school, and making sacrifices." I slowly looked into her eyes. "You have had the same opportunities all along." She laughed. "I have kids. You made that decision." I didn't mean for the words to sound so harsh. I lowered my voice. "It's not simple, mind you. It's not my duty, I'm saying." For a while, we sat quietly and observed the children through the window. While attempting to collect drips from their cones, they were giggling. At last, Carol responded, "Rebecca, I do love you. Everyone does. Their way, our way. Transactional and conditional. Not in the manner that I required affection. I also adore you." It was accurate, in spite of everything. I can't continue doing this, though. I'm dying over it. Perhaps realizing for the first time that this was not a negotiation, she nodded slowly. It served as a border. Before the kids went, I gave them another scoop of ice cream, gave them a firm hug, promised to deliver gifts on the birthday. I wasn't interrupting them. All of this was innocent of them. Ben glanced back and waved his small face gravely as they left. "Goodbye, Aunt Rebecca. Please don't get lost again." My heart broke. It was not me who got lost. It was 3 months later. Winter arrived. My first holiday without family responsibilities was coming up. I purchased a modest Christmas tree for myself and adorned it with decorations of my choosing. Not ones filled with recollections of childhood. On Christmas Eve, I invited friends around for a potluck meal. It wasn't awful, but it was different. My father sent me an email on Christmas morning, which was the first time I had heard from him directly since everything had transpired. "Rebecca," it started. "Oh no," or "Happy Christmas." Your mom asked me to get in touch. Since you interrupted us, things have been challenging. Edward was forced to return home. This year, Carol's children won't receive anything for Christmas. Did you wish for that? To discipline the kids? At Christmas, there was no hint of missing me. No explanation for why I had interrupted them. More guilt, that's all. I didn't reply, therefore I erased the email. A new year began on New Year's Eve. I went to a coworker's house for a party, laughed more than I had in months, and felt lighter at midnight as everyone applauded and gave each other hugs. An unknown number texted me, making my phone vibrate. Edward was the one. I miss you, sis. Happy New Year. Can we have a conversation? I'm prepared to hear it. I spent a lot of time looking at the message. Was it a sincere effort to restore the financial pipeline? Or was it just another one? It didn't matter, I determined. I still wasn't prepared to reintegrate any of them into my life. Perhaps one day. Not just now, though. Not until I had the strength to keep my distance. I didn't answer. Instead of taking out a mortgage to help others, I was creating a life that was genuinely mine. Exactly a year after watching the movie, in April, I got a 10-page handwritten letter from my mother. Curiosity overcame me, and I opened it. It started off differently from my father's little email. My lovely Rebecca. She described how the previous year had made them face their actions, how they had used and taken advantage of me. She accepted the footage and said she was disturbed by those experiences. Right now, she wrote, we were mistaken, so gravely incorrect. In our treatment of you over the years, not simply in our words that evening. The only explanation I can think of is that it happened gradually. Before we started to anticipate it to feel entitled to your achievement, without taking into account the cost to you, we gave it a little loan here and another there. She continued by explaining how they had adapted to living without my help. Edward had moved into a smaller flat and acquired 2 jobs. Carol had launched a craft-selling website. They had reduced the size of their own house. We're doing okay, she wrote. It's been challenging, but essential. Rather than relying on you, we ought to have been doing this all along. The letter went on to provide pleasant recollections of my early years, when we were truly a family. Everything was complicated by money. In closing, she said, I'm not writing to ask for anything, just to say I'm sorry, we're all sorry, and we're ready if you ever want to try again to have a relationship based on love and respect instead of financial obligation. However, just if and when you are. Mom. She signed it with remorse and affection. I gently folded the letter and stored it. Didn't reply right away. I needed some time to think about what I wanted. I took some time a week later to compose my own letter. It's only 1 page long. I enumerated all the money I had sacrificed for them, to accept the truth of what had transpired, not to instill shame in them. I was worthy of the honor. I then wrote about how painful it was to learn how they truly perceived me, and how it made me rethink what I had assumed about love and family. I concluded I don't know if we can rebuild, but if we do, it must be different. Your ATM is not me. I am your sister and daughter, someone with my own wants and aspirations. Look me in the eye if you can. Maybe we can begin slowly again. The next day, I mailed the letter. After that, I went for a lengthy stroll with my dog in my new neighborhood, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face while inhaling the aroma of springtime flowers. I was going to be okay, no matter what happened to my family. I took away the most important lesson. Being loved shouldn't come at the expense of your personal health. I finally had the courage to terminate the account since some relationships are too expensive.